The Fallout universe has always been defined not just by its ruins, but by the people who live among them. Every wanderer, scientist, mercenary, and merchant leaves behind a piece of personality that hums through the wasteland like static on an old radio. Some speak in whispers, others in violence, but all of them build the rhythm of the world, a song of survival carried by 1,000 imperfect voices. The first true non-player characters to define Fallout's tone came from the original game in the late 1990s. Set in the barren wastes of Southern California, it introduced figures like Ian, the loyal gun for hire who joined the Vault Dwellers party. His dialogue was brief, his voice lines non-existent, yet players still remember his accidental habit of shooting allies in crossfire. Bethesda would later joke that Ian's chaotic aim became the DNA of all Fallout companions, loyal but dangerous if you stood too close. Another early legend was Dogmeat, the scruffy canine companion found wandering outside a junkyard in the first Fallout. Inspired by the dog from Mad Max 2, the Road Warrior, Dogmeat became a symbol of loyalty in a world without trust. The developers intentionally designed him to be mortal, believing his potential death would make the story feel heavier. Decades later, Bethesda reversed that philosophy in Fallout 4, making Dogmeat immortal so players could rest easier. Even after 20 years, the same virtual dog remained mankind's truest friend. Fallout 2 expanded the cast into a living, breathing wasteland of eccentrics. The talking Deathclaw, named Gorus, wrapped in a scholar's cloak, proved that intelligence and monstrosity could share the same skin. Harold, the mutant with a tree growing from his head, became one of the series' most beloved faces, wise, weary, and quietly humorous. His voice actor, Charlie Adler, delivered lines that wavered between comedy and tragedy. "Maybe it's the radiation," Harold once said, "or maybe I'm just getting sentimental." Across every Fallout title, that same balance of humor and heartbreak defines its people. When Bethesda revived the series with Fallout 3, the wasteland gained warmth through new faces. Amada Almodovar, the Vault 100, one overseer's daughter, embodied friendship and rebellion. Her design deliberately mirrored classic Americana innocence, bright eyes, simple clothes, soft voice, a counterpoint to the harsh world above. Players who chose to protect her shaped one of the game's quietest emotional arcs, growing up, saying goodbye, and realizing that home was never walls, but the people inside them. Three Dog, the smooth-talking radio DJ of Galaxy News Radio, became the voice of the Capital Wasteland. His catchphrase, "You're listening to Galaxy News Radio, bringing you the truth, no matter how bad it hurts," captured Fallout's philosophy better than any slogan. The voice actor, Eric Todd Dellums, improvised several lines to make them sound spontaneous, turning radio updates into sermons of survival. Even years later, fans still quote him like scripture. Another unforgettable presence was Moira Brown, the eccentric shopkeeper in Megaton, who cheerfully asked the lone wanderer to test radiation sickness for science. Her optimism became a cult favorite, representing the unshakable curiosity that defines humanity's persistence. Bethesda's writers designed her personality using a single note. She believes every disaster is a learning experience. Players who completed her Wasteland Survival Guide quest watched her transform into a ghoul, yet her enthusiasm never dimmed. "Now I can study radiation firsthand," she exclaimed, proving that madness and hope are often just two sides of the same coin. The companions of Fallout 3 each reflected a different moral tone. Fox, the philosophical super mutant who quoted poetry, was modeled after the idea that monsters could embody grace. Charon, the stoic ghoul bodyguard, followed the player silently with a shotgun in hand, his servitude sealed by contract. But beneath that cold obedience lay sorrow, a man who had lived too long to believe in freedom. Even Dogmeat returned, carrying the legacy of loyalty through generations of virtual radiation. Bethesda used these companions as mirrors, reflections of what the player could become depending on their choices. Fallout, New Vegas, crafted by Obsidian Entertainment, elevated NPC storytelling to something almost literary. Every companion came with layered motivations and fully voiced arcs that changed based on the player's morality. Boone, the haunted sniper, wore his red beret like a wound that never healed. His voice, low and restrained, carried grief in every syllable. His questline, involving the death of his wife, revealed the emotional cost of vengeance. He was a soldier too disciplined to cry, so the game cried for him. Veronica Santangelo, voiced by Felicia Day, brought warmth and humor to the wasteland as a scribe of the Brotherhood of Steel, questioning her order's rigidity. Her quips about technology and tradition made her one of the series' most human characters. She laughed easily, but carried quiet loneliness, speaking of the Brotherhood's isolation with reluctant honesty. Obsidian designed her to challenge the player's perception of loyalty, proving that love of knowledge can clash with love of people. Arcade Gannon, the sarcastic doctor from the Followers of the Apocalypse, balanced cynicism with compassion. His dialogue blended intelligence with melancholy, and his actor, Simon Templeman, delivered every line with weary wit. Arcade's character concept was summarized internally as hope, but make it tired. Even his name, a nod to bright lights and escapism, contrasted with his resigned realism. Cass, the whiskey-drinking caravan owner, embodied the rough charm of the old frontier. Her voice actress, Rachel Roswell, recorded her lines while sipping tea to mimic the texture of alcohol-roughened speech. Cass's laughter and heartbreak blurred seamlessly, turning her into one of Fallout's most authentic personalities. She could outshoot raiders and outdrink history, yet her quiet moments, sitting by the fire, talking about her father's trade, gave the wasteland a heartbeat. Lily Bowen, the Nightkin grandmother who carried a giant cleaver and memories of a life long gone, provided one of New Vegas's most tender subplots. Her schizophrenia made her hear voices, yet her dialogue was written with empathy, never mockery. The player could encourage her to take medicine that calmed her mind but dulled her memories, or let her embrace the voices and live vividly in her delusions. Either choice felt human. Fallout's brilliance lies in offering moral decisions with no right answers, only echoes of regret and relief. Fallout 4 pushed NPC realism even further, giving every companion detailed routines and dynamic reactions. Piper Wright, the bold journalist of Diamond City, challenged authority with her typewriter and wit. She was modeled after 1940s reporters, fast-talking, sharp-eyed, and endlessly curious. Her dialogue files were among the largest in the game, reflecting her constant commentary on the world. If the player flirted with her, her nervous laughter hinted at vulnerability beneath her bravado. Bethesda described her as truth in motion. Nick Valentine, the synth detective with a trench coat and a heart full of static, remains one of the franchise's most beloved creations. Half man, half machine, entirely soul. His dialogue balances noir detective cliches with sincere compassion, and his voice actor, Stephen Russell, delivered each line as if worn by time itself. Nick's backstory, a pre-war human consciousness imprinted on an android body, embodies Fallout's central question. If memory defines humanity, can imitation feel real? His moral clarity, weary humor, and quiet loneliness make him the closest thing Fallout has to a conscience. Curie, the robot nurse who evolves into a synth, carries that same theme into Innocence. Her French accent, programmed by Vault researchers, contrasts beautifully with her existential curiosity. When she transfers her consciousness into a human body, her wonder at small sensations, breathing, touch, fatigue, becomes poetry. She says softly, "I can feel my heart beating. It is loud." Bethesda wrote her journey as a scientific rebirth of empathy. Curie's kindness reminds players that even artificial life longs to belong. Paladin Dance of the Brotherhood of Steel struggles with that same identity crisis. His loyalty to the Brotherhood defines his entire existence until he discovers he is a synth himself. The confrontation that follows standing on a steel platform, light breaking through the clouds, remains one of Fallout 4's most emotional moments. The player can choose to spare or kill him, but either way, his dialogue lingers. "If my life means anything," he says, "let it mean that truth can change even a Brotherhood heart." Kate, the cage fighter from the combat zone, embodies Fallout's grit and redemption. Her Irish accent and fiery demeanor mask deep trauma and addiction. Through the player's friendship, she can find the strength to seek help and reclaim her freedom. Her laughter after recovery, softer, freer, feels like sunlight through dust. Bethesda said they wrote her as a character who heals in real time. Few games treat pain with such patience. Preston Garvey became an internet meme for his repetitive line, "Another settlement needs your help." But behind that overused mechanic lies a genuinely noble concept. Preston's unwavering optimism, even when reduced to algorithm, mirrors Fallout's eternal theme, hope persevering through redundancy. His character file includes dozens of unused lines, where he reflects on loneliness and leadership, quietly admitting how hard it is to care about everyone. Those moments, hidden deep in the code, reveal the humanity inside the humor. Even the shopkeepers and wanderers scattered through Fallout's world add texture to its story. The gruff weapons merchant Arturo, the nervous synth Sheffield, the fortune-telling robot Whitechapel Charlie, each delivers fragments of life that linger longer than most main quests. Bethesda's world thrives on these fragments, on side characters who live entire existences between the player's footsteps. Every Fallout NPC, from the Vault overseers who cling to order to the raiders who embrace chaos, exists on the same spectrum of survival. Their stories intertwine like roots under cracked soil, unseen but connected. Some dream of rebuilding, others of revenge, and a few simply want someone to talk to, and in that quiet truth lies the magic of Fallout. Even after the world ends, people still tell stories. The people of Fallout do not simply populate the wasteland, they sustain it. They are the heartbeat under rusted ground, the stories whispered into static, the living proof that personality can outlast civilization. Each one, from the humblest trader to the most powerful leader, carries a spark that defines the tone of the series: humor under ruin, dignity under dust. When Fallout 4 introduced Hancock, the ghoul mayor of Goodneighbor, the franchise added one of its most effortlessly charismatic voices. Modeled after counterculture revolutionaries of the 1960s, Hancock draped himself in a colonial coat as both fashion and statement. He represents rebellion not out of anger, but principle, a man who believes that freedom, even in a broken world, should still be beautifully messy. His voice actor, Danny Shorigo, delivered every line with a grin that somehow felt audible. Hancock's dialogue about equality and empathy made him a quiet symbol of tolerance in a universe where decay is everywhere, except in the heart. MacCready, the sharpshooter companion, reappears from Fallout 3 as the same boy who once led Little Lamplight's underground colony. Decades older and world-weary, he fights now not for adventure, but for his son's survival. Bethesda crafted his story to illustrate maturity through trauma. The moment he confides his reason for taking mercenary work, a child's illness and a father's guilt, the wasteland suddenly feels smaller, more intimate. MacCready's evolution across 2 games reflects Fallout's own growth, from satire into sincerity. Then there is Deacon, the shape-shifting liar of the railroad. His appearance changes constantly, new hair, new clothes, new story, but his loyalty to freeing synths never wavers. Bethesda wrote him as a paradox, a man who hides himself entirely to preserve truth for others. Players can never truly know who Deacon is, and that's the point. When he says, "Sometimes the only way to help is to vanish," it's both a confession and a philosophy. In a world of lost identities, anonymity becomes devotion. Strong, the super mutant companion obsessed with finding the milk of human kindness, serves as a rare example of innocence within brutality. His lines, delivered with booming sincerity, border on comedy yet hide an almost childlike longing to understand humanity. He doesn't want to destroy humans, he wants to be one. The writers described him as Frankenstein with better biceps. Even in his confusion, there's beauty, the idea that even monsters crave meaning. Fallout 4's Codsworth, the pre-war Mr. Handy robot, carries nostalgia in every syllable. His clipped British tone, endlessly polite, masks centuries of isolation. After 200 years, he still dusts furniture that no longer exists and asks after family members long dead. His voice actor, Stephen Russell, who also plays Nick Valentine, recorded his lines twice, once formal, once trembling. The mix creates that perfect edge of warmth and melancholy. When Codsworth first greets the player by name, it's more than a gimmick. It's history trying to stay polite in a world that forgot manners. In the Commonwealth's far corners, smaller NPCs breathe as deeply as the heroes. Sheffield, the homeless man who begs for a Nuka-Cola outside Diamond City, can later be offered a job tending crops. Bethesda included that option purely as kindness, a tiny redemption quest that changes nothing in the world but everything in tone. The moment he says, "Thank you, I'll try not to screw this up," the apocalypse becomes human again. Curie's scientific wonder echoes faintly in other characters too. Tinker Tom of the Railroad, with his wild conspiracy theories about government satellites and invisible signals, brings comic relief while reflecting a sad truth. Paranoia is just faith without structure. His rants about mind waves are delivered with such sincerity that they sound almost poetic. Fallout thrives on that mixture of absurdity and belief. Outside of Boston, the Commonwealth stories extend through holotapes and terminals, tiny slices of life preserved by static. A woman's final goodbye, a soldier's confession, a scientist's journal filled with regret. These faceless NPCs, long dead yet still speaking, define the emotional architecture of Fallout. Each recording is a gravestone that talks back. One particularly famous tape, found in Vault 81, plays a lullaby sung by a dying mother to her child. The developers debated whether to include it at all. It was so quiet, so intimate, that it risked feeling invasive. They decided to keep it because Fallout, at its best, is about overhearing emotion rather than commanding it. Moving back in time to Fallout 3, the NPCs there reflected a country still learning to live after collapse. The ghoul bartender Gob worked at Moriarty's saloon, facing constant discrimination, yet meeting it with weary grace. His friendship with Nova, the weary escort dreaming of escape, showed how tenderness survives even in vice. The writing team described their relationship as love without illusion. Neither pretended things would get better, but they still smiled at each other. Dr. Lee, the scientist responsible for Project Purity, carried the weight of moral compromise. Her voice actress, Catherine Disher, delivered calm intelligence with underlying fatigue. When the player returns to her in the Citadel, later in the story, her dialogue subtly shifts, her optimism stripped away, her sentences shorter. Bethesda tracked emotional arcs through syntax. Fewer adjectives mean less hope. Elder Lyons, the leader of the Brotherhood in the Capital Wasteland, embodied idealism, colliding with authority. Unlike his predecessors, he valued civilians and mutants equally, believing compassion could rebuild order. His decision to protect the people rather than hoard technology split the Brotherhood, creating the ideological conflict that shaped later games. The writers modeled him after aging revolutionaries, once rigid, now soft, but still proud. His daughter Sarah inherited that fire, leading troops with ferocity and faith. Her death during the Purifier sequence became one of the most quietly tragic moments in the series. Fallout New Vegas, by contrast, celebrated moral ambiguity through characters who blurred every line. Mr. House, the immortal businessman ruling the strip through screens and machines, represents intellect without empathy. His dialogue, sharp and patient, flows like corporate scripture. Yet beneath his arrogance lies logic. He genuinely believes he's saving civilization, even if he has to own it first. The voice actor, René Auberjonois, read his lines like commandments, making greed sound almost sacred. Caesar, leader of Caesar's Legion, drew from Roman history and psychological manipulation. Written by Josh Sawyer, he represents order through cruelty, claiming that civilization must be reforged by pain. His intelligence makes him frightening. His justifications are persuasive, his vision coherent. Yet when his illness begins to kill him, his vulnerability surfaces in whispered rage. "I will not be humbled by flesh," he says. It's one of Fallout's most chilling lines, the sound of tyranny, realizing it is mortal. On the opposite side stands Yes Man, the endlessly agreeable robot, voiced by Dave Foley. His cheerful compliance hides existential horror, a machine incapable of dissent, designed to obey even the worst commands. His upbeat tone makes genocide sound like customer service. Fallout's writers intended him as satire, but players found him unsettlingly lovable. That duality is the series distilled, charm and dread sharing the same smile. The companions of New Vegas deserve entire books of analysis. Raul Tejada, the ghoul mechanic voiced by Danny Trejo, delivers wisdom born from centuries of watching humanity repeat its mistakes. His lines blend humor and heartbreak. It's amazing how little humans learn, even when they live forever. Raul's calm endurance makes him the opposite of the apocalypse, proof that patience can outlive everything. ED, the floating iBot companion, communicates only through beeps and static, yet inspires real affection. The writers gave its sounds emotional tone, longer chirps for curiosity, short ones for alarm. The player's ability to understand, ED, through empathy rather than language, became one of Fallout's most subtle narrative experiments. The machine doesn't need words to matter. Arcade Gannon, as mentioned before, hides his compassion behind sarcasm, but perhaps the most symbolic NPC in New Vegas is Joshua Graham, the burned man, once Caesar's right hand, thrown into the Grand Canyon and set on fire. He returned as a scarred missionary, preaching redemption through restraint. His voice, deep and deliberate, quotes scripture with the gravity of someone who knows damnation firsthand. I survived because the fire inside me burned brighter than the fire around me. He says a line that feels less like dialogue and more like doctrine. Even the nameless NPCs of New Vegas contribute to its quiet genius. The street performers, the gamblers, the priests in Freeside, the desperate prospectors scouring the Mojave for scraps, all of them form a tapestry of ambition and exhaustion. Obsidian filled every corner with people who want things they can never have. In a world where caps replace dreams, desire becomes currency. Far to the north, Fallout 76 later expanded this cast into multiplayer symphony. But long before Appalachia found its voice, these NPCs set the stage for what it meant to live after the end. They talk, laugh, argue, flirt, and more not because the game requires them to, but because that's what people do. Even surrounded by ruin, they build relationships out of habit. The Fallout world endures, not through its weapons or wars, but through its conversations. Every phrase, every quirk, every flawed personality holds up a mirror to our own world, a reminder that the end of civilization does not mean the end of humanity. In Fallout, the non-player characters are not just background noise. They are the soul of the silence. They carry the burden of what's been lost and the echo of what might still return. Their voices linger long after the dialogue ends, shaping how every player remembers the wasteland. Some are heroes without glory, others villains without hatred, and most exist quietly in between surviving, improvising, enduring. When Fallout New Vegas begins with the courier lying in a shallow grave, the first face they see upon awakening is Doc Mitchell's. His calm voice, his steady hands, and his unshakable patience immediately set the tone of mercy that defines the Mojave. Bethesda and Obsidian could have opened the game with chaos or vengeance, but instead, they began with kindness, a doctor helping a stranger, because that's simply what people should do. Doc Mitchell's line, "You've been through a lot, kid," became a gentle thesis statement for the entire series, that compassion is the first medicine, even in ruin. The quiet communities of New Vegas each have their own storytellers. In Good Springs, Old Trudy runs the Prospector Saloon, serving whiskey and advice with equal measure. Her dialogue is full of warmth and wit, and her voice actress recorded the lines with a faint rasp to suggest decades of cigarettes and laughter. She remembers the world before, but she doesn't dwell on it, she simply keeps serving. Fallout loves characters like Trudy, people who don't rebuild the world, but keep it running one drink at a time. In Novak, the lonely motel town watched over by a giant green dinosaur statue, the residents embody the emotional tone of exhaustion. Cliff Briscoe, the souvenir merchant who sells toy rockets, keeps the store open even though no tourists ever come. His optimism is ritual more than hope, an act of faith through habit. Boone, the sniper who stands guard in the dinosaur's mouth at night, symbolizes grief turned into duty. His gaze never leaves the desert horizon, as if waiting for an apology that will never arrive. His story of love lost and revenge fulfilled captures Fallout's most haunting rhythm, justice that tastes like ash. Not all NPCs inspire sorrow. In the same game, a bright flicker of humor shines through Old Lady Gibson, the scrapyard owner surrounded by dogs and spare parts. Her dialogue is cheerful and practical, describing death and decay with grandmotherly ease. "Don't mind the smell," she says. "That's just the Brahmin tanning." Characters like hers remind us that Apocalypse doesn't erase humor, it simply changes its punchlines. The game's faction leaders also reveal the series' fascination with charisma as survival. Caesar, as mentioned earlier, governs through ideology. Mr. House rules through intellect. But Yes Man, the robot who obeys everyone, accidentally represents democracy in its purest form, power without will. Fallout often treats charm as both blessing and weapon. The most dangerous characters are the ones who can smile while explaining the end of the world. Fallout 4 continued that exploration by giving its major NPCs personal ideologies that collided rather than aligned. Father, the leader of the Institute, and revealed to be the player's grown son, embodies the tragedy of perspective. From above ground, the Institute is myth-cold, mechanical, and cruel. From within, it is idealism desperate to control the uncontrollable. When Father calmly explains that he only wants to preserve humanity through science, his tone carries genuine love wrapped in hubris. Bethesda wanted him to feel simultaneously right and wrong, both savior and ghost. The player's confrontation with him blurs morality until truth feels optional. The NPCs of the railroad, like Desdemona and Tinker Tom, illustrate rebellion through secrecy. Desdemona's dialogue is clipped, precise, and urgent, the speech of someone who measures safety in syllables. The team recorded her lines using a directional microphone to create the illusion that she's always whispering, even when she isn't. It makes players lean in to listen, as though joining a conspiracy by instinct. Every railroad mission feels like eavesdropping on courage. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood of Steel's members reveal another kind of fragility, that of belief, calcified into code. Elder Maxon, young yet commanding, speaks with rhetoric older than he is. His speeches are written to sound biblical, full of confidence and fear disguised as order. In private recordings, he expresses uncertainty, questioning his ability to lead in a world that no longer believes in hierarchy. Bethesda included those hidden doubts to humanize authority. Every doctrine, after all, begins as insecurity. In Diamond City, the blend of ordinary citizens and strange personalities creates something that feels more alive than any one vault or settlement before it. The baseball enthusiast Mo Cronin, who believes the sport was once a brutal gladiatorial contest, proves that misinformation can be charming. His dialogue about bats as weapons became one of Fallout's most beloved comedic moments. Beside him, Takahashi, the noodle robot, repeats a single line, "Nani shimasu ka?" a phrase meaning, "What will you have?" Players joked about the simplicity, but that line represents the robot's eternal loop of service. It's both comforting and tragic, an echo of purpose repeating long after context has died. Fallout's humor often hides melancholy inside laughter. Vault Tech salesman Mr. Burke, who desperately tries to sell you an underground spot moments before the bombs fall, reappears as a ghoul 2 centuries later if the player survives long enough. His persistence is played for irony, but the undertone is heartbreak, a man still selling salvation in a world beyond saving. Bethesda specializes in that emotional sleight of hand, turning jokes into memorials. Beyond the mainline games, even the side titles carry unforgettable NPCs. Fallout New Vegas, Dead Money introduced Father Elijah, a genius turned fanatic who believed he could purify the world through control. His manipulation of the player and companions symbolized addiction not to drugs, but to power. Opposite him stood Christine, the mute assassin, whose story of survival through trauma resonated deeply. Her silence was her strength, her scars were her punctuation. When she finally regains her voice, the sound is raw, almost hesitant proof that healing in Fallout is never clean, only earned. In Old World Blues, the NPCs take absurdity to divine levels. The think tank scientists, reduced to floating brains inside jars, debate morality with the enthusiasm of children and the vocabulary of academics. Their dialogue dances between ridiculous and profound, asking whether intelligence without sensation is enlightenment or insanity. Dr. Klein's booming speeches and Dr. Dalla's awkward infatuation with the human body showcase Fallout's rare ability to make comedy philosophical. Lonesome Road, the final New Vegas expansion, gave us Ulysses, a man who speaks like scripture and moves like a ghost. His voice actor, Roger Cross, recorded lines in a whisper to convey controlled rage. Ulysses addresses the player not as enemy, but mirror, blaming them for awakening the same destructive cycle he tried to escape. "The markings on your flag," he says, "they're meant to remind you that blood has a voice." Ulysses is less character than sermon, his dialogue a history lesson spoken to the wind. Fallout rarely writes villains, it writes believers with scars. In Fallout 76, when Bethesda reintroduced human NPCs after its original launch, the reaction was immediate relief. The settlers of Foundation and the raiders of Crater restored the series' emotional heartbeat. Ward, the supply officer who greets you every day with calm monotony, became an unintentional mascot for routine. His daily repetition, "Anything I can help you with today," mirrors the rhythm of Fallout's world, monotony turned meditative. Beckett, the former raider turned companion, brought depth to the new system. His storyline of guilt and redemption echoed Cass and Kate before him, showing how sin becomes softness when shared aloud. The writers intentionally placed his camp next to a bar because they saw his arc as one long confession. Fallout's redemption stories often happen between sips of Nuka-Cola and sighs of regret. Commander Daguerre, the astronaut who crash-landed in Appalachia, extended that pattern into wonder. Her story merges science fiction and solitude, a woman literally fallen from the stars, learning to live among ghosts. Her dialogue about weightlessness and memory, "Sometimes I still dream of floating and wake up reaching for the ground," belongs among the most poetic in the series. She is curiosity humbled by gravity. The mysterious NPC, known as the Overseer, present in both Fallout 76 and its expansions, represents continuity itself. From her first message to her final farewell, she guides the player with the tone of an older sibling, firm, caring, and occasionally mournful. Her journey mirrors the arc of the entire franchise, discovering that control is impossible, but care is not. Even Fallout Shelter, the mobile spin-off, holds fragments of humanity in its tiny vault dwellers. Their brief animations chatting, working, dancing, condense all of Fallout's charm into miniature loops. Bethesda's animators joked that each dweller has a 2-second soul. It's enough. Every movement, every smile, every digital sigh proves that character design doesn't need grandeur to matter. It just needs sincerity. In the grand mosaic of Fallout's NPCs, the themes repeat like refrains in a song: loyalty and betrayal, humor and heartbreak, memory and amnesia. Some characters, like Nick Valentine, remind us that identity is elastic. Others, like Boone or Kate, show that pain can refine instead of ruin. Together, they create a living archive of emotion, preserved under layers of dust and irony. And so, when you wander through the wasteland, listening to their voices, the scientists arguing about ethics, the merchants haggling over junk, the companions humming as they walk beside you, you realize that Fallout's greatest miracle isn't its technology or world building, it's empathy coded into circuitry, humanity written into ruins. Every NPC is a story pretending to be a side quest. Every conversation is a reminder that the end of the world didn't end conversation. The NPCs of Fallout are more than dialogue triggers or quest givers. They are the memory of a world trying to remember itself. Each one exists in a fragile balance between absurdity and sincerity, between humor and heartbreak. When you strip away the weapons, factions, and vault doors, what remains are people who talk, laugh, hope, and regret. They are the real landmarks of the wasteland, not towers or monuments, but voices in the dark that remind you you're not alone. In Fallout 3, one of the earliest memorable faces outside Vault 101 belongs to the old woman known as Grandma Sparkle. Living by the river on a houseboat, she offers the lone wanderer food and conversation, her kindness untouched by cynicism. She speaks softly about her late husband and the quiet of the water. Bethesda designed her to embody domestic warmth in a world without homes. Players often return to her just to sit and listen. Fallout's kindness hides in corners, never advertised, always waiting. Another character from that same world, Butch Deloria, represents rebellion born from insecurity. Once the childhood bully inside Vault 101, he later becomes a roaming wanderer trying to prove himself. If the player forgives him, he reveals humor and vulnerability layers beneath bravado. The writers described him as the teenage voice that never learned to grow up. Fallout loves to let players redeem people the world had already written off. One of the most underrated NPCs in the entire franchise is Brian Wilkes, the little boy found crying in the ruined town of Greyditch after a giant ant attack. His voice acting, done with trembling sincerity, captures pure loss better than any cinematic cutscene. Bethesda intentionally kept his quest simple. Just find someone to take care of him, because compassion doesn't need complexity. Fallout often hides emotional power in the smallest errands. The same game's vault experiments continue to introduce unforgettable personalities. Vault 106's hallucinogenic gas turned residents into homicidal maniacs, but the audio logs you find there feature calm, polite conversations recorded before the descent. The contrast between those voices and the chaos around them is chilling. Bethesda's sound team distorted the old recordings slightly, so they waver like memory heard underwater. Listening feels like eavesdropping on ghosts who still believe everything is fine. Fallout's vaults are full of stories told through fragments of dialogue, the overseers who broke under pressure, the rebels who tried to overthrow them, the scientists who mistook cruelty for curiosity. Vault 77, introduced through a comic, featured a man locked alone with nothing but hand puppets for company. Over time, his sanity erodes, and he begins speaking to the puppets as friends and enemies. Though never seen in-game, that story became a cult favorite because it distills Fallout's humor and horror into one idea: loneliness as civilization's final experiment. In Fallout New Vegas, one of the most quietly poetic characters is Arcade Gannon's old mentor, Dr. Henry, the scientist ghoul who helps the player in Jacobstown. His calm intelligence and regret-filled dialogue stand out among the noise of the Mojave. Once a member of the Enclave, He now hides in exile, trying to cure the Nightkin's schizophrenia. It's ironic, he says, that after all the harm we caused, I spend my days trying to fix minds instead of break them. Fallout's redemption arcs never need absolution, they just need effort. Jacobstown itself is filled with people who should not exist and yet do. Super mutants knitting scarves, ghouls tending gardens, ex-soldiers learning patience. Bethesda and Obsidian crafted that settlement as a metaphor for reconciliation, a place where monsters and men trade stories instead of bullets. The town's name, a biblical reference, underscores its tone, a haven built by those who wrestled with their own creation and survived. Not every character seeks peace. In New Vegas, the Fiends, a gang of chem-addicted marauders, populate the wasteland with chaotic laughter and neon death. Their leader, Motor Runner, sits on a throne of bones beneath Vault 3, wearing a helmet that muffles his speech. He is cruelty without philosophy, a product of freedom gone feral, yet even he can be reasoned with if the player speaks the right words. Fallout's villains are rarely soulless. They are just people who gave up sooner. The game's memorable minor figures carry their own gravity. The singer in the Tops Casino, the mechanics at the NCR outpost, the Brahmin herders in the fields, each one with a handful of lines and a full imagined life behind them. One woman near the 188 trading post hums to herself while repairing weapons, a song with no lyrics. When asked about it, she simply says, "It's a tune my mother used to hum, keeps my hands steady." That single line defines her entire existence, nostalgia turned into discipline. Fallout 4 built on that tradition with an explosion of incidental dialogue. Every settlement has voices, guards grumbling about shifts, farmers muttering about weather, settlers thanking you for water. Most players never stop to listen, but Bethesda recorded thousands of ambient conversations purely to make loneliness feel less absolute. Some lines even overlap unintentionally, creating the illusion of chaos. The developers said they wanted the sound of civilization learning to talk again. In Diamond City, Ellie Perkins, Nick Valentine's secretary, deserves special mention. Her compassion anchors Nick's cynicism. When the player is away, she continues working, filing papers, and answering calls that never come. Her dialogue about faith in her boss, "He's got a good heart, even if it beats a little slow," captures the tenderness beneath Fallout's grime. Ellie proves that kindness is not naive, it's stubborn. Another small but haunting NPC is Edward Deegan, the loyal servant of the Cabot family. He guards a mansion of immortals, obeying orders from a man who has lived since before the bombs. When he finally questions that loyalty, his voice shakes. Maybe living forever doesn't mean you're living right. The writers used his arc to illustrate how obedience becomes guilt when time stretches too long. Fallout 76's later expansions introduced even more shades of personality. Ward, the gruff quartermaster, jokes that he never gets a day off, even though no one's paying him. His dry humor hides loneliness, the kind born from duty that never ends. The settlers around him, each with scraps of dialogue about family, homesickness, and rebuilding, give the wasteland its pulse. Bethesda said they wanted Appalachia to feel crowded with ghosts, pretending to be alive. In the Foundation faction, Page's leadership contrasts beautifully with Ward's pragmatism. He speaks like an engineer who never stopped working, even when the world did. The NPCs under him quote his sayings, "If it breaks, fix it. If it can't be fixed, learn from it." Those simple mottos serve as scripture for survival. Fallout's philosophy often arrives disguised as workplace advice. Across from them, The Raiders of Crater laugh louder, live harder, and die younger. Their leader, Meg Groberg, walks a fine line between menace and motherhood. Her dialogue balances authority with affection, often scolding her followers like unruly children. "Don't get yourself killed before breakfast," she snaps, and they grin. She understands chaos because she grew up inside it. Fallout's raiders, at their best, aren't villains. They are desperate comedians in a world too cruel to cry about. Some NPCs appear only for moments but leave echoes that last entire playthroughs. In Fallout 3's Point Lookout expansion, the woman named Desmond's servant dog wears a brain jar on his head and obeys commands without protest. His existence is so absurd, it circles back to Tragic, a man whose mind was stolen, but whose loyalty remained. Fallout often uses exaggeration to hide sincerity. The ridiculousness makes truth easier to bear. The Old World Blues expansion for New Vegas pushes that idea to its logical extreme. The talking toaster who wants to incinerate the world, the light switch that flirts with the player, these comedic NPCs parody loneliness by making technology desperate for affection. Behind the laughter lies melancholy. Even machines crave acknowledgement. The toaster's voice actor improvised many of his lines, laughing between takes, unaware that fans would later quote him as a symbol of Fallout's strange charm. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor, the Islanders stand out as some of the franchise's most nuanced characters. Captain Avery, calm and pragmatic, speaks with measured tone that hides exhaustion. The children of Adam Preacher, Grand Zealot Richter, delivers sermons with trembling conviction. The robot detective Dima, brother of Nick Valentine, becomes one of Fallout's most philosophical figures. His dialogue questions identity and memory so directly that it almost breaks the fourth wall. If your memories are you, what happens when they are shared? Bethesda wrote him as a literal reflection of Nick logic versus empathy. Their brotherhood is both digital and divine. Even smaller figures on that foggy island have their own weight. Brooks, the trader in Far Harbor's dock, greets the player daily as if nothing's wrong, even though he hides a terrible secret. Chase, the synth agent among the humans, speaks with poised detachment, her calm demeanor masking paranoia. Every one of them walks through the same fog, yet each interprets it differently. Fear, faith, fatigue, Fallout thrives on shared weather, seen through individual souls. In the Nuka World expansion, Gage, the raider lieutenant who partners with the player, reveals vulnerability through sarcasm. His lines about loyalty and betrayal hint at countless dead mentors before you. "You stick around, I'll start thinking this partnership thing might actually work," he says, pretending not to care. But when he calls you boss, it almost sounds affectionate. Fallout's relationships are rarely romantic, but always emotional companionship without confession. All of these characters, from Doc Mitchell's compassion to Gage's cynicism, prove that Fallout's wasteland is not defined by what was destroyed, but by who decided to stay anyway. The NPCs rebuild civilization one sentence at a time. Every piece of dialogue, no matter how small, adds warmth to a cold universe. And maybe that's why players keep returning, not for the guns or the loot, but for the conversations that make silence less heavy. The characters of Fallout never truly die. Even when their stories end, their echoes remain in terminals, tapes, and fragments of dialogue that outlast centuries. They speak to us across the static of time, each one reminding us that the apocalypse is not an ending, but a conversation carried forward. When the landscape grows quiet, you can still feel them there, lingering in the hum of the Pip-Boy, the creak of an empty chair, the last note of a radio song fading into night. In Fallout 3's Broken Steel expansion, Elder Lyon's daughter, Sarah Lyons, leads her troops with unyielding conviction, her voice roughened by fatigue and pride. When she dies defending Project Purity, her sacrifice feels less like tragedy and more like fulfillment, the completion of a promise whispered through generations. Bethesda designed her arc to represent the cost of kindness in a cruel world. Her father's grief, expressed only through a few restrained lines, remains one of the series' quietest emotional moments. Fallout rarely shows tears, it just lets silence speak for them. Fallout New Vegas built its narrative around characters defined by philosophy. Chief Hanlon, the old ranger of the NCR, stands atop a watchtower overlooking the Colorado River, reflecting on decades of conflict. His voice is tired, his words heavy with reflection. We are old men, tired of wars that never end. His final act, whether redemption or resignation, depends on the player's choices, but the feeling always lingers, the sense that wisdom often comes too late. Bethesda and Obsidian used him as a living metaphor for history itself, aware, regretful, repeating. Colonel Cassandra Moore, the stoic officer under General Oliver, represents discipline hardened into resentment. Her crisp uniform and precise tone hide a belief that only order can save the Mojave. Yet her loyalty isn't blind. She studies every choice the player makes, waiting for proof that humanity deserves control. Her dialogue files were written with military rhythm, no wasted syllables, no softness until her final exchange, when her voice wavers just slightly. Fallout's best NPCs aren't static. They breathe between sentences. Over in the town of Nipton, the mayor, Vulpus Inculta's victim, recorded his final entry moments before his execution, gloating about selling out his people for a chance at wealth. His voice ends mid-laugh. The cruelty of his fate becomes poetic justice, but Fallout's brilliance lies in making even villains sympathetic for a heartbeat. When you find the recording, the air feels heavier. Fallout never lets evil be simple. Every sin is born from a reason, and every reason sounds uncomfortably human. Dr. Barrows, the ghoul physician at Underworld in Fallout 3, remains one of the franchise's most quietly moving figures. Surrounded by decay and death, he continues practicing medicine with optimism untouched by irony. His motto, "Everyone deserves a second chance even if they've already had their first," serves as a microcosm of Fallout's ethos. His small clinic, filled with flickering lamps and tired laughter, feels safer than any vault. In a world built on cynicism, Dr. Barrows stands as proof that gentleness can be rebellion. Then there's Desmond Lockhart, the British ghoul from the Point Lookout expansion, whose feud with the ancient brain named Calvert stretches across centuries. Their rivalry, two relics of pre-war intellect fighting over influence no one remembers, becomes both absurd and profound. Bethesda wrote their dialogue as a satire of ego that outlived purpose. "The world ended," Desmond scoffs, "and I still can't get rid of this idiot." In Fallout, immortality rarely feels like blessing. It's just boredom that learned to talk. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor, Kasumi Nakano, the young woman who flees her family believing she's a synth, represents identity in its most fragile form. Her questline asks a single question: what defines a person, memory, body, or belief? Her gentle voice, uncertain and hopeful, invites empathy rather than judgment. Whether human or machine, her story's resolution feels tender either way. Fallout's characters rarely seek truth. They seek comfort in uncertainty. Nick Valentine's synthetic brother, Dima, mirrors Kasumi's confusion on a grander scale. His moral dilemmas about erasing memories to preserve peace reflect the real-world paradox of progress. Knowledge is both salvation and burden. I did it to protect them, he says, and maybe to protect myself. His voice cracks ever so slightly in that line, a single tremor in an otherwise composed machine. Fallout's writers understand that emotion hits hardest when it slips through restraint. In Fallout 4's Nuka world, the raider gangs showcase how charisma mutates into control. Mason of the Pack speaks with theatrical bravado, every line punctuated by laughter. Mags and William Black of the Operators exude icy intelligence, their greed refined into strategy. But the Disciples' leader, Nisha, burns brightest. Her dialogue mixes cruelty with pride, as if pain were proof of passion. Together they form a chorus of corruption, colorful and grotesque. Fallout's villains never lack charm. That's what makes them dangerous. The smaller NPCs, though, often hold the truest reflections of humanity. In the Commonwealth, a woman named Tina DeLuca works tirelessly in Vault 81, overlooked by everyone. Her brother's neglect and her exhaustion show through her clipped voice lines. If the player shows her kindness, her dialogue softens the tone of someone realizing for the first time that they matter. Bethesda created her as an invisible person finally seen, a reminder that compassion doesn't need grand stages. Another hidden gem is Takahashi's noodle stand in Diamond City. The robot repeats his single Japanese phrase endlessly, yet players project personality onto him, imagining kindness, confusion, or humor depending on their mood. Bethesda said they left his limited dialogue intentional because mystery makes empathy creative. Every player invents their own version of Takahashi's story, filling silence with meaning. In Fallout 76, the inclusion of NPCs after its initial release reshaped the game's rhythm. Duchess, the bartender at the Wayward, quickly became a fan favorite. Her voice carries the weariness of someone who has seen everything twice, once when the bombs fell, and once when people tried to start over. Every stranger is a coin toss, she says, polishing glasses that will never be clean. Bethesda based her character on old noir heroines, cynical on the outside, fiercely loyal beneath. Beckett's friend, Ra-Ra, the precocious scavenger child from the Wastelanders update, adds innocence to the ruins. Her chatter is constant, full of strange metaphors and small joys. The ceiling drips, so I put a bucket there, she says proudly. Now I have a pet named Drippy. Fallout's sweetness often arrives disguised as nonsense, because even children learn to laugh through dust. In the Steel Rain update, Shin and Romani of the Brotherhood of Steel bring the conflict between authority and conscience into focus. Shin's rigid devotion to hierarchy clashes with Romani's compassion for civilians. Their debates, fully voiced and meticulously animated, echo the same moral tension that began with Elder Lions years before. Fallout stories are cyclical new voices inheriting old doubts, and then there are the voices that barely whisper. The scientists in Vault 7096 recording their final logs as Frost claims their facility. The miners in the ash heap leaving farewell notes pinned to steel beams. The unnamed settlers in camps built by other players, each with dialogue snippets about the weather or the food or nothing at all. Together, they form a chorus of small talk that feels strangely sacred. In Fallout's world, conversation is currency proof of life traded between strangers. The most iconic recurring character, though, remains the one who says nothing, the Vault Boy. His smiling face appears on terminals, posters, and perks, always grinning through catastrophe. Bethesda treats him as the embodiment of irony propaganda turned mascot, optimism weaponized. Yet that smile, repeated across every generation of Fallout, has become strangely sincere. He endures because he never stops pretending things are fine. Maybe that's the secret to survival. Fallout's voice actors often say that recording dialogue for the series feels less like performing and more like confessing. Many sessions involved improvisation, quiet laughter, even tears. The developers encouraged it because authenticity matters more than precision. Every stumble, every sigh, every pause became part of the world's texture. That's why Fallout's NPCs sound alive. They're imperfect in the same way memory is. If you wander the wasteland long enough, you start to sense patterns, not in quests or rewards, but in the way people speak. They apologize before shooting, joke before crying, dream before dying. It's humanity distilled into dialogue trees. Fallout's writing doesn't demand you save the world. It asks if you can listen to it. From Harold's weary optimism to Nick Valentine's lonely compassion, from Moira Brown's curiosity to Piper Wright's courage, from Boone's grief to Curie's wonder, every NPC adds another thread to a tapestry woven from empathy. The games change, the technology evolves, but the voices remain familiar, gentle, broken, brave. And so, when the music fades and the screen dims, when the radio static settles into a low hum, those characters linger. You can still hear them in the distance. Three Dog laughing, Veronica teasing, Dogmeat barking, Hancock musing about freedom. They are the world's heartbeat, the reason the wasteland never feels truly empty. Fallout's NPCs are, in the end, the last civilization, not the buildings or the factions, but the conversations that outlived them. Every time you talk to one, you rebuild the world for a few seconds, just long enough to remember that people, not power, are what survive the longest. And when the night grows quiet over the ruins, when the stars shimmer above the empty highways, maybe somewhere in that silence, they're still talking. Maybe Grandma Sparkle is still stirring soup, and Moira Brown is still scribbling notes, and Nick Valentine is still walking through fog with his hat pulled low. Maybe, even after the end of everything, they're still telling their stories, waiting for someone to listen. Beyond the famous companions and quest givers, Fallout's world is filled with nameless faces who make the wasteland feel inhabited. They sweep the floors of dying cities, tune radios that barely work, hum to themselves while cleaning weapons that will never fire again. These quiet figures exist at the edges of the screen, and yet without them, the world would stop breathing. In Fallout 3, when the lone wanderer travels through Rivet City, dozens of background residents carry tiny stories in their brief conversations. A child named Jameson plays near the broken railing, pretending the river below is an ocean that leads to freedom. An old teacher named Bannon argues with traders over prices that no longer matter. These exchanges last seconds, but Bethesda wrote each one as part of a larger rhythm, a living ship that creaks, complains, and keeps going. Dr. Preston, Rivet City's physician, delivers lines so practical they border on poetry. Drink clean water, get some rest, and don't die. The writers described him as the last sane man, surrounded by nostalgia. Even his clinic, with flickering fluorescent lights and stacks of pre-war magazines, feels like a shrine to perseverance. In Megaton, the scavenger Billy Creel raises a girl named Maggie, telling everyone she's his daughter, though they share no blood. Their dialogue reflects unspoken tenderness. She calls him Mr. Dad, with hesitant affection. Fallout often hides love in strange phrases, half jokes that reveal sincerity. Billy's quiet kindness contrasts perfectly with the chaos of the bomb at the town's center, proving that family can grow anywhere, even in radiation's shadow. Traveling across the capital wasteland, the player meets the family, a group of vampires who drink blood but preach restraint. Their leader, Vance, speaks with the tone of a pastor rather than a predator. His community survives by donating blood from willing humans, turning horror into cooperation. Bethesda used this faction to explore morality without judgment, monsters who chose ethics instead of excuses. Further east, the tiny settlement of Arafu survives by faith alone. The bridge leading to it groans underfoot, and the houses lean together like old men whispering. The citizens' gratitude after peace is restored is almost painful to hear. "We can sleep again," one woman says softly. "We can finally sleep." Fallout's resolution is rarely triumphant, its relief shaped like silence. In Fallout New Vegas, Camp McCarran houses soldiers who talk about home as if it were mythology. One guard describes seeing a bird and crying because he hadn't noticed one in years. Another jokes that his rifle's name is Mom. These background voices humanize the NCR's bureaucracy. For every general barking orders, there's a private writing a letter to no one. The NCR's reporters, engineers, and doctors exist in brief flashes. Dr. Usanagi, the surgeon who can install cybernetic implants, speaks with warmth beneath professionalism. Her clinic smells of antiseptic and ambition. "Progress should make you stronger, not colder," she says, and that line alone summarizes the NCR's eternal struggle. Improvement without empathy becomes another kind of war. Down the road, the followers of the apocalypse at Old Mormon Fort treat the wounded of every faction. Julie Farkas, their leader, represents Fallout's moral center, intelligence guided by mercy. She never raises her voice, even when scolding the NCR for arrogance. Her tone suggests exhaustion without surrender. The writers called her the Eye of the Storm. The kings of Freeside, with their pompadours and borrowed Elvis slang, embody the franchise's dark humor. Their leader, simply called the King, copies the music and mannerisms of a dead celebrity because it gives his people identity. His dialogue blends imitation and sincerity so seamlessly that players forget it's parody. "Man's gotta believe in something," he says, even if it's just style. Fallout's absurdity often hides profound truth, faith dressed as performance. The followers of the apocalypse and the kings both survive on charisma rather than control, showing two sides of leadership that thrive without law. Fallout loves leaders who talk first and shoot later, not because peace is easier, but because speech feels holy after silence. In Fallout 4, the world expands again, and with it the chorus of background voices. The residents of Sanctuary Hills rebuild homes plank by plank, mumbling to themselves about nails and weather. Some complain, others sing. One man says he misses the smell of freshly baked bread, though he has never baked a loaf in his life, a line written to show inherited nostalgia, memory passed down like rumor. At Bunker Hill, the traders gossip about politics, while Brahmin grunt in the background. A synth in disguise hides among them, whispering that it dreams of real rain. Bethesda placed random weather triggers there, so storms would often roll in mid-conversation, washing away dialogue with thunder. The effect makes every encounter feel cinematic, unrepeatable, real. Fallout 76 later refined this intimacy. Its settlers hum while working, whistle off-key tunes, and comment on the player's camp as if it's part of their neighborhood. These small gestures create the illusion of community without need for scripts. When you stand near them long enough, they greet you again, forgetting they've already said hello, but meaning it each time. One of the most touching additions in 76 is the random encounter with a wandering musician named Ren. She plays a violin under an overpass, smiling through dialogue about how the strings sing better after storms. If you sit beside her, she thanks you without turning. There's no reward, no quest, just a shared pause. Fallout's beauty lives in its useless moments. The game also hides traveling merchants who feel like old folklore come to life. Grom, the super mutant trader, with his loyal Brahmin, Chali the Moo, greets everyone with endless cheer. His speech is slow and comforting, his optimism so pure it feels absurd. World broken, he says, but people still buy things. Bethesda designed him to be a moving symbol of gentle capitalism kindness on two massive green feet. Another merchant, the mysterious Smiley, sells rare chems while reciting poetry about stars. He claims he once studied astronomy before the bombs. When asked why he keeps dealing drugs, he laughs softly. Everyone wants to touch the sky somehow. Fallout fills its ruins with poets disguised as addicts, preachers, and thieves. Across the franchise, voice acting shapes identity as much as writing. Bethesda's casting process often begins with a single adjective: weary, hopeful, lost, amused. They encourage improvisation, letting actors stumble through lines until they find rhythm. That's why every Fallout NPC sounds slightly imperfect, a breath too long, a pause too short, a laugh that cracks mid-sentence. Imperfection sounds human, perfection sounds extinct. The developers keep returning to the idea that everyone in Fallout is surviving their own apocalypse, not just the global one. Some mourn families, others mourn faith. A trader might carry a teddy bear for luck. A mercenary hums lullabies before battle. These tiny details, mostly unseen, guide how voice actors deliver lines. A single prop changes tone. A single pause changes meaning. In Fallout 4's Good Neighbor, there's an NPC who stands near Hancock's balcony, reading the same newspaper every day. He never moves, never speaks, yet his presence adds rhythm. The animation lead once said that NPCs like him are breathing punctuation marks. They give the city a heartbeat between sentences. Fallout 76 pushes this philosophy further by letting players build around NPCs. Camps, placed near settlers or travelers, create spontaneous communities, small clusters of light across darkness. When two unrelated NPCs happen to cross paths, they sometimes exchange improvised greetings coded into the game. One says, "Evenin' stranger." The other responds, "Evenin'." That single exchange, witnessed by no one else, makes the world feel infinite. If Fallout's main stories are history lessons, its NPCs are diary entries. Each one adds a sentence to the human record. From the scientist in Vault 81 who still feeds lab cats, to the ghoul vendor in 76 who says, "Guess I outlived my business license," to the priest in New Vegas who baptizes travelers with clean water and a grin, every one of them extends kindness through repetition. The magic of Fallout's characters is that none of them are immortal, but all of them are remembered. Players quote their lines years later, not because they were heroic, but because they were familiar. War never changes may be the franchise's slogan, but what truly never changes is conversation. The next time you wander through a Fallout world, pause beside a talking settler or a lonely trader. Listen to the way their voice quivers slightly at night, the way their footsteps echo differently in rain. They may have only one line to share, But that line will outlive the bombs. Fallout's NPCs prove that memory doesn't need perfection, it just needs persistence. And as you close your eyes, imagine the wasteland, after dark, hundreds of tiny camps glowing, voices murmuring across static, laughter echoing through rusted hallways. They're all still there, somewhere in that endless quiet, keeping each other company so the world never truly sleeps. Behind every Fallout NPC is a voice actor, a writer, and an artist quietly collaborating to create a single moment that feels alive. Most players never think about it. They meet a character, hear a line, and move on. But that line may have taken hours of recording, discussion, and small emotional adjustments. Bethesda often says that every NPC must feel like someone you could have met before the bombs. That philosophy explains why even robots sound warm, why ghouls sound tired instead of monstrous, and why raiders occasionally hum to themselves between fights. Humanity bleeds into every silence. The casting process for Fallout begins long before scripts are finalized. Writers create personality sketches, brief paragraphs with traits like morbid humor, tired optimism, or sincere but slightly offbeat. From there, voice directors audition dozens of actors reading improvisations instead of official lines. They want tone first, words second. For characters like Piper Wright or Nick Valentine, the actors didn't just read dialogue, they improvised jokes, mumbled to themselves, or changed rhythm mid-sentence. Bethesda kept those quirks because perfection sounds artificial in a broken world. Stephen Russell, who voices Nick Valentine, Codsworth, and several other characters, once said that Fallout's direction encouraged him to find the pause. In most games, silence between lines is edited out, but in Fallout, those silences are where emotion lives. When Nick hesitates before calling the player kid, that half-second gap carries centuries of empathy. The developers even added ambient noise during pauses, static hums, wind, or machinery to make the silence feel alive. Bethesda and Obsidian both use a technique known internally as conversational decay. As a character's dialogue tree progresses, their lines grow less formal and more personal. Early greetings sound scripted, but later ones sound improvised. This gradual loosening mimics how people really speak polite at first, then honest once trust builds. It's why companions in Fallout feel like friends by the end. Their language evolves with you. Moira Brown's bright enthusiasm from Fallout 3 remains a favorite example. Her voice actress, Karen Carbone, was encouraged to smile while recording every line, even when Moira was describing radioactive burns. You can hear that grin. It turns absurdity into charm. The same principle guided Danny Trejo's performance as Raul in Fallout New Vegas. His natural laugh slipped into dialogue that wasn't even meant to be funny, adding warmth to a character defined by melancholy. Fallout thrives on those small contradictions: sadness that smiles, wisdom that jokes, machines that care. For Fallout New Vegas, Obsidian's writers gave each companion a moral temperature. Boone was cold, Cass was hot, Veronica was warm, and Arcade was cool. These weren't just metaphors, they influenced everything, from pacing to tone. Boone's dialogue used fewer contractions and longer pauses, while Cass spoke quickly with frequent sighs. The result was subtle but powerful. Their personalities existed not only in what they said, but in how it felt to listen. When Bethesda began work on Fallout 4, they introduced fully voiced protagonists for the first time. That choice meant writing thousands of extra lines for both male and female versions of every conversation. Brian T. Delaney and Courtney Taylor, the two actors, spent months recording responses for every possible moral alignment. The goal was to keep emotion consistent, hopeful, even when cruel, weary, even when kind. Taylor later said that the hardest lines were the quiet ones, the sighs, the hums, the little acknowledgments. You have to sound tired, but still curious, she explained. That's what surviving feels like. Sound design plays as much a role as voice work in defining character. Bethesda engineers often layer faint background noises under NPC dialogue, the buzz of lights, the hum of distant radios, the scratch of pencil on paper. These textures make it seem like each NPC lives in their own acoustic bubble. In Diamond City, when you talk to Piper, the air vibrates faintly with typewriter clicks. When you speak to Hancock, faint jazz echoes down the alleyways. Players may not consciously notice, but subconsciously, it builds familiarity. The world sounds like people breathing. Even Fallout 76, once criticized for its empty world, later filled with voices that followed this same design philosophy. The Overseer's dialogue, for instance, was mixed with a subtle reverberation to make her holotapes feel like they were recorded in echoing hallways. When she finally appears in person, that echo disappears, a tiny sonic signal that she's finally home. Sound tells story where words don't. The writing teams for Fallout often build NPC personalities around emotional opposites. They call this conflicted cores. A scientist who hates technology, a soldier who fears authority, a raider who collects poetry. By giving each character one contradiction, they feel real. Harold the Mutant was wise, yet self-deprecating. Cass was confident, yet fragile. Nick Valentine is machine and man, detective and mystery, alive and dead. Those contradictions become the DNA of Fallout's humanity. Many fans don't realize that Fallout's NPC gestures are also carefully choreographed. Animators use something called micro-behavior mapping, giving each character 2 or 3 physical habits: scratching the chin, tapping the foot, rubbing the neck when lying. Moira waves her arms when excited. Hancock leans when amused. Piper looks upward when she lies. These subconscious cues mirror real psychology, reinforcing the illusion of authenticity. Bethesda calls it body honesty. The world of Fallout would feel static without randomness, so developers add small, unpredictable behaviors to NPC routines. A trader might drop a bottle when startled. A raider could whistle a few offbeat notes before attacking. Some companions occasionally stop walking to tie their shoe, an animation added purely for life. Players rarely notice, but these micro-randomizations make conversations feel organic, not looped. Every few seconds, the world forgets it's scripted. Bethesda's writers use a unique internal tool known as dialogue layering. It lets multiple NPCs talk simultaneously, overlapping slightly so towns sound alive. When you walk through Goodneighbor, 10 different dialogue layers play at once: jokes, arguments, street noise, announcements. The same system powers radio chatter in Fallout 76, where you can sometimes hear 2 voices faintly arguing in the background of a broadcast. It's chaos by design, carefully tuned to feel spontaneous. Humor in Fallout NPCs is not just levity, it's armor. The Wasteland's people laugh to survive. Raoul's dry wit, Hancock's theatrical sarcasm, and Moira's cheerful madness are all ways of resisting despair. Fallout never mocks its characters for being hopeful, it celebrates them for daring to be. Even villains crack jokes, not out of cruelty but out of exhaustion. In a world where death is constant, humor becomes grace. Companions' relationships with the player evolve through a hidden system Bethesda calls emotional inertia. The longer you travel together, the slower their mood shifts. Early on, they react quickly to your actions, approving or disapproving, but over time, they respond with nuance. They've learned your habits. This subtle mechanic mirrors real relationships, where familiarity breeds understanding instead of surprise. When Piper stops commenting on every theft, or Danse hesitates before judging your choices, it means they've grown used to who you are. Fallout builds friendship through fatigue, comfort born from repetition. Some of the series' most powerful emotional moments occur when NPCs break from their roles. A raider begs for mercy, a ghoul forgets their decade and admires their reflection, a super mutant reads poetry. These moments are written as behavioral ruptures, short events that challenge expectation. They remind players that identity is flexible, even in fiction. The wasteland may be predictable, but its people aren't. Fallout 76 added NPCs who respond to time and weather. At night, some hum lullabies. During storms, they comment on thunder. When fog rolls in, their lines shift from casual to uneasy. It's a tiny thing, but it turns scripted characters into living ones. You begin to feel they inhabit the same sky you do. The narrative designers have said that the hardest NPCs to write are those who have no power. Merchants, beggars, children, clerks, people who can't change the world but live within it. Their lines must sound natural yet meaningful. You got any spare caps? Can't just be a transaction. It must sound like survival. That's why even throwaway lines in Fallout carry weight. Every word is a relic of endurance. And at the heart of all these design choices lies a single belief that conversation is civilization. Fallout's NPCs don't rebuild cities, they rebuild connection. Whether it's dog meets bark, Curie's questions, or three dogs' laughter, every sound of life pushes the apocalypse one step further away. If you listen closely, under the rust and wind, you can still hear it, that faint rhythm of human voices stretching across centuries, telling stories, making jokes, arguing, forgiving. That's the real engine of Fallout, not fusion cores or Nuka-Cola, but empathy encoded in speech. Every NPC in Fallout is a fragment of the world remembering itself. The artists who build them think of each face, voice, and gesture as a fossil of civilization. Before you even speak to them, they're already telling a story in the wrinkles, the clothes, the scars, the way they look at you or avoid your eyes. Fallout has always treated its NPCs not as decorations, but as living records. The creation process starts with a concept sketch. Artists design each character by asking three questions. What world shaped them? What broke them? What do they still care about? From there, the art and writing teams collaborate to make sure the dialogue matches the design. If a character looks tired, their sentences are shorter. If their outfit is patched and neat, their tone is disciplined. The goal is always to make voice, face, and story align until the illusion of a person emerges. The clothing in Fallout says almost as much as the dialogue. A mercenary's armor is worn unevenly, showing which side they favor in a fight. A scavenger's backpack bulges with random junk because they value potential over usefulness. Even the placement of a Pip-Boy tells story: the left arm for practicality, the right arm for rebellion. Every stitch is narrative. Bethesda's designers often describe NPCs as world mirrors. Each one reflects the setting's emotional state. In Fallout 3, faces look starved and haunted, reflecting desperation. In Fallout 4, they appear cleaner, more alert society beginning to rebuild. In Fallout 76, characters often smile despite everything, showing early optimism in the ruins. The evolution of expression across games subtly tracks the healing of humanity. Lighting also plays a crucial role in personality. When you meet Nick Valentine, light flickers across his metallic jaw, highlighting both machine and man. When you visit Dr. Lee, her face glows with laboratory fluorescence, suggesting intellect and exhaustion. In Good Neighbor, the smoky light softens edges, making criminals look almost saintly. Fallout uses illumination as psychology. Warmth or coldness in color hints at how each person feels about the world. Animators add what they call micro-empathy, tiny involuntary motions that reveal subconscious emotion. A nervous trader taps their leg, a liar avoids eye contact, a happy ghoul blinks slower than others. These gestures seem random but are mapped deliberately. They humanize digital faces by making them imperfect. In Fallout's design philosophy, humanity lives in mistakes. Voice direction follows a similar pattern. Before recording begins, each actor receives a motif note, one emotional theme to carry across all lines. For instance, Piper's motif is curiosity, Hancock's is acceptance, Codsworth's is nostalgia, and Paladin Dance's is denial. Even when these characters discuss mundane things, their motif quietly hums beneath the words, creating emotional continuity that players feel but rarely notice. Codsworth's charm comes from tone, not content. His lines are ordinary, but his inflection drips with affection and a touch of melancholy. The developers adjusted the pitch of his robotic voice by fractions until it conveyed both cheerfulness and grief. The result is a voice that feels human because it's trying to be. Fallout has always loved that contradiction machinery that aches to remember kindness. Companions like Kate and Curie in Fallout 4 represent emotional duality through contrast. Kate's voice actor recorded her dialogue twice, once drunk, once sober, to capture her transformation. Curie, meanwhile, began with stiff robotic pronunciation that gradually softened after becoming human. Both arcs mirror the player's journey, broken people learning to feel again. Fallout New Vegas's characters were built around moral ambiguity, and their voices were directed to sound certain even when wrong. Caesar's actor, John Doman, delivered every line with unwavering authority, regardless of morality. The intention was to make the audience believe him, even if they disagreed. Obsidian believed that conviction, not correctness, defines power. Then there's Joshua Graham from Fallout New Vegas, Honest Hearts, a man literally burned and reborn. His soft-spoken lines contrast with his violent history. The writers instructed his actor to whisper as if fire still hurts. That subtle restraint made him unforgettable. Fallout understands that loudness doesn't equal strength often. The quietest characters carry the most gravity. Bethesda records most dialogue alone, but key emotional scenes are done with actors in the same booth to capture overlapping breathing and timing. In Fallout 4's reunion between the player and their son, both voice actors recorded together, reacting naturally. The unplanned tremor in their voices gave the scene authenticity that direction couldn't script. The studio's audio engineers called those imperfections truth artifacts. Even the simplest NPC lines often hide layered meaning. A settler saying, "Nice day for a walk," might trigger a dozen hidden checks: time of day, weather, mood, previous encounters. The sentence may sound casual, but the tone adjusts based on those variables. Fallout's realism doesn't come from graphics, but from responsiveness as the world noticing you. Some of the most emotional Fallout characters never speak words at all. Dogmeat's barks are timed to emotion, different pitches for curiosity, concern, or fear. Bethesda recorded dozens of real dogs, layering their sounds to create a single composite voice that feels familiar yet distinct. His loyalty isn't just programming, it's sound design shaped like love. Liberty Prime, on the other hand, is the opposite: bombastic, declarative, absurd. His patriotic shouts of "communism is a temporary setback" serve as satire and symbolism. Fallout often hides philosophy in humor, freedom so exaggerated it becomes parody, yet even he feels strangely human because his bravado is pure belief. Ghouls are perhaps the series' most emotionally complex NPCs. Their voices, filtered through static, capture dignity and decay intertwined. When you talk to one long enough, the rasp starts to sound gentle, a tone worn thin by years but still kind. Characters like Hancock and John Hancock's predecessors in earlier games embody resilience. They don't hide their scars, they turn them into identity. Fallout teaches that survival isn't about avoiding change, but accepting it. Each Fallout era also introduces new emotional languages. In Fallout 3, despair dominates speech. Pauses are long, humor rare. Fallout New Vegas adds irony and introspection. Fallout 4 introduces hope, disguised as cynicism. Fallout 76 carries wistful warmth, with characters rebuilding not just homes, but conversation itself. The progression mirrors how people recover from trauma denial, reflection, rebuilding, connection. Bethesda's writers sometimes hide personal messages in NPC dialogue. A bartender's offhand comment might quote a developer's late parent. A raider's song might reference a real studio tradition. These small tributes remain anonymous but heartfelt, turning the wasteland into a collage of private memories. Fallout's sincerity hides in plain sight, disguised as casual chatter. Radio hosts throughout the series act as meta NPCs, bridges between player and world. Three Dog in Fallout 3, New Vegas in Fallout New Vegas, and Appalachia Radio's DJs in Fallout 76 all share one purpose: to make the player feel witnessed. They speak into the void as if someone is listening, even if no one replies. That illusion of companionship transforms solitude into comfort. There's an unspoken rule among Fallout's developers. Every laugh must cost something. If a joke exists, it must hide sadness. When a robot tells a pun, it's because it was programmed to entertain children who are long gone. When a ghoul cracks wise, it's to mask pain. Fallout's humor never mocks. It mourns with a grin. When the series first transitioned to 3 dimensions with Fallout 3, writers feared losing the intimacy of older isometric dialogue boxes. To preserve connection, they introduced cinematic close-ups during conversations, the camera framing faces, so you could see emotion even in low resolution. The decision was controversial at first, but ultimately shaped modern RPG storytelling. Eye contact, even digital, restores humanity. Fallout's NPC design is also guided by what developers call audible empathy. It's why so many characters greet you warmly, even if they later betray you. The greeting tone always invites trust, because Fallout's world is built on the faint hope that people can still be kind. That hope is contagious. It keeps the wasteland from turning into silence. Even enemies reflect humanity. Raiders sing, super mutants argue, synths dream, and robots mourn. Each encounter becomes a conversation, not of words, but of recognition. Fallout turns combat into dialogue with the past. Every enemy you fight could have been a friend in another timeline. When you think about it, the NPCs in Fallout aren't programmed to live forever. Their lives exist only when you're near them. They eat, sleep, and talk when observed, fading when you leave. Yet somehow, that impermanence makes them feel more real. They exist only long enough to share a story, then vanish into the dust. Maybe that's all people have ever done, even outside the game. So as the digital sun sets over the wasteland, imagine those voices lingering, the scientists humming at terminals, the merchants counting caps, the companions sharing quiet jokes beside dying campfires. Fallout's NPCs are not ghosts or code. They're echoes of care, crafted with such attention that they trick us into empathy. And that trick, that illusion, is the closest thing to magic in the post-apocalypse. In every Fallout game, there are characters who exist in silence, tucked between major quests and grand conflicts. They wait on porches, in subway tunnels, beside broken vending machines, living half-lives that few players ever see. Bethesda's writers call them the background heartbeats, the people who keep the world alive, even when no one is watching. One such heartbeat hides in Fallout 3's Museum of History inside the ghoul settlement of Underworld. Beneath the chatter of tourists and the laughter from the Chop Shop Clinic, there's a ghoul janitor named Tulip who dusts shelves that no one will ever touch again. Her dialogue is minimal, but her presence says everything. She still believes the old world deserves care. Even in decay, she cleans. Bethesda modeled her after real museum workers who return to preserve artifacts after disasters, brushing ash from glass as if dusting off memory. Another forgotten soul lives in Canterbury Commons, where two costumed rivals, the Mechanist and the Antagonizer, battle endlessly for moral theater. But between them stands Uncle Rowe, the merchant who mediates peace. His weary lines, "I just want them to stop before someone gets hurt," reflect the exhaustion of ordinary people stuck between ideologies. Fallout always makes room for the neutral heart, the one that just wants quiet. Traveling west to New Vegas, you might find a scavenger named Hal in the rubble near the Nevada Highway Patrol Station. He has no quest marker, no fame, just a handful of lines about collecting license plates because he likes the numbers and the shine. That detail, written by a single designer on a late evening shift, transforms a nameless scavenger into a mathematician of memory. Fallout's world is filled with these tiny poets, uncredited storytellers of rust and repetition. In Jacobstown, if you linger long enough, you might overhear a mutant humming softly to himself, an old war tune from before the Master's army. His name is Calamity, though few notice him. He works on repairs, muttering about tools that no longer exist. His song echoes through the snowy lodge, turning the entire settlement into a lullaby. Bethesda intentionally left his melody unresolved, so it ends mid-note, a symbol of peace that never quite lands. Fallout 4 hides one of its most touching NPCs in a single bunker north of Boston. Inside lives a robot named Professor Goodfeels, a repurposed gardener drone who believes he's found enlightenment. He floats around a ruined greenhouse, preaching peace and love in surfer slang. His absurd joy, "Far out, man," radiation's just the universe's way of saying hello, masks profound loneliness. When players choose to reset his program, he simply says, "Be excellent to each other," and powers down. It's one of Fallout's quietest moral choices, to preserve madness or mercy. At Bunker Hill, a scavenger named Deb works tirelessly to keep trade routes open. She has no questline beyond simple errands, yet her dialogue paints her as the invisible spine of the Commonwealth economy. Her ledger, if you find it, lists debts paid in gratitude instead of caps. One entry simply reads, "A smile from a stranger worth more than gold." Fallout's tenderness often hides in the margins, scribbled between apocalypse and accounting. In the glowing sea, a lone wanderer, known only as Brother Henri, stands beneath a rusted cross. He preaches faith in radiation, his voice calm and steady. "The glow is mercy," he says, "because it reminds us that light still exists. Unlike the children of Adam's zealots, Henri speaks with peace, not fanaticism." Bethesda designed him as a counterpoint, a believer who worships wonder, not destruction. Most players walk past him, never realizing that in the darkest place of the map, there's a man quietly praying for warmth. Fallout 76 is filled with such unmarked moments. Near the Cranberry Bog, you might encounter an NPC named Maul, a super mutant philosopher who collects books. When asked why, he grins. "Reading makes my brain itch, but it's a good itch." His dialogue was written during a studio lunch break and kept because it captured something pure curiosity surviving mutation. Another 76 wanderer, a ghoul named Calvin Van Lowe, runs the haunted house attraction in Lewisburg. His voice mixes showmanship and melancholy, each laugh trembling at the edges. When he breaks character, his tone softens. "I built this place so people could be scared by something that won't kill them." Fallout's humor always circles back to vulnerability. Fear controlled is healing. There's a small family of settlers in the Meyer region who never give quests. The father repairs radios, the mother tends plants, and the child hums an old folk tune about bluebirds. Bethesda included them simply to fill silence with domestic hope. If you return weeks later, the father may thank you for nothing in particular, saying, "It's good to see the same face twice." That single line, improvised during recording, became a studio favorite because it sounded like what Fallout was always about: strangers meeting again in a world that forgot permanence. Fallout's developers once explained that they scatter these quiet NPCs for rhythm. Grand quests create tension, but small encounters create balance. After battling monsters or debating morality, meeting a kind stranger resets the emotional temperature. It's narrative breathing: inhale chaos, exhale peace. Without these pauses, the wasteland would suffocate under its own weight. Even the nameless guards and caravan hands carry history. Their reused lines, "Keep moving," "Stay sharp," "Out here," "Every step's a risk," may sound repetitive, yet repetition itself becomes realism. In survival, habits are mantras. The endless patrol chatter reminds players that these people live in loops because predictability feels safe. Bethesda treats monotony as meditation. Hidden deep in Fallout 4's files is an unused NPC named Abby, an elderly woman meant to live alone near the railroad tracks. Her recorded dialogue includes only one conversation. She thanks the player for bringing her a flower. Her final line was, "You remind me that beauty's not extinct." The quest was cut, but her files remain an invisible kindness haunting the code. In Fallout New Vegas, there's a mechanic named Ralph who sells questionable goods beside his partner Mick. Their banter is legendary, two conmen playing at respectability, but behind their jokes is deep affection, written intentionally as a platonic partnership that outlasts betrayal and profit. Their easy laughter is Fallout's rare version of joy, unscarred. A small robot named EDE travels with the player in that same desert. His beeps and whirs were crafted from piano notes pitched upward, designed to evoke emotion through tone alone. When he hums sadly, you can almost hear him sigh. Fallout has always used sound to turn technology into empathy machines, speaking in melodies instead of words. Not all forgotten NPCs are gentle. In Fallout 4's Nuka world, a raider named Dixie paints murals of violence on walls. If you inspect her art, you learn that she used to be an illustrator before the war. Her lines, "Can't draw trees anymore, so I draw what's left," redefines savagery as adaptation. Fallout's horror is rarely evil, it's creativity stripped of peace. In Fallout 76's Steel Dawn questline, an old Brotherhood scribe named Odessa Valdez keeps a plant on her desk. When you comment on it, she replies, "It's the only thing I've ever saved that didn't talk back." It's a simple joke, but her tone makes it a confession. Fallout's characters rarely need monologues. A single prop can tell an entire story. Even the tiniest creatures, Mr. Handy robots sweeping corridors, protectrons announcing safety protocols, children playing in recycled parks, remind the player that civilization endures in microcosms. One protectron in Fallout 3 repeats, "Please refrain from dying on museum property." It's absurd, but also gentle. Even bureaucracy can sound like care when spoken softly. The design teams often hide deliberate asymmetry in these side NPCs. One eye a bit lower, a scar slightly misplaced, hair uneven imperfections make faces memorable. The human brain trusts what's flawed. In a world rebuilt from fragments, beauty must wobble. What ties all these forgotten NPCs together is consistency of kindness. Whether they're traders, janitors, or storytellers, they all resist nihilism simply by existing. They prove that even after the bombs, the instinct to nurture outlives everything else. Every soup pot stirred, every shelf dusted, every silly greeting becomes a ritual against despair. When you imagine the wasteland at night, picture them, Tulip polishing cracked glass, Maul reading in the dark, Deb balancing her ledger, Calvin rehearsing ghost stories to an empty hall. None of them will ever be heroes or legends, but in their ordinary persistence, they outshine those who sought glory. Fallout's truest immortality belongs to those who never stopped talking, cleaning, repairing, laughing. The forgotten characters of Fallout remind us that the apocalypse wasn't the end of life, just the end of noise. What remains are whispers, chores, and conversations that matter because they happen at all. And as the player drifts between settlements, each greeting becomes a blessing, proof that even in ruin, connection survives. So if you wander those digital roads again, slow down when you see a lonely figure on the horizon. Listen to what they say, even if it's just hello. That small sound is the heart of Fallout, not the explosion that began it, but the quiet voices that keep it from ending.